Hi guys. I hope you all went through your TK prep and learned a little bit about React life cycles. Now, um, I have not watched this current set of videos, so I don't know how deep it got into why we use life cycles, right? So who can tell me why we use life cycles in general? What does it matter? All right, we got to monitor life cycle changes. Thank you, Jason. Um, we got manage different states, utilize when and where to update the DOM, to manage app state and DOM management, manage changing data. Yep. Anyone else got anything? Sure, log in, log out. That would be a place you would worry about using a lifecycle method. I mean, it all comes down to the fact that our components have lives, right? There's a point in time where they do not exist on the DOM, and there's a point in time where they do exist on the DOM. And then from that point, there are times when they're updated on the DOM. And for a lot of reasons, and a lot of them are hard to explain, except for one major one, which we'll go over tonight. We want to make sure that we can act on updates to our components, whether that be first mounting, whether that be updating, whether that be the life cycle, the component is being removed from the DOM. We want to know about those things at certain times. Sometimes, I mean, we haven't built a single component yet that we've even cared about that, right? And so we do care, and we want to care about it. And we're going to go over some stuff tonight that is fetching from an external API, which we're not going to go over fetching from an external API in this lesson. We're actually going to do that in week from Monday, I believe, is when we do spa week. Or it might be next week. I'm not sure. But we're going to go over that soon. But really, like the number one time I think of when I think of component lifecycle is fetching some data from an API. So far, we've been given our data, right? We've just got our Pokemon data here. We've been given it. We're going to work with something tonight that actually goes to a server and gets data for us. So kind of just to do a little bit of a refresher, let's come in here. What we got? Of course. All right, let's debug this real quick. So we have a warning right here. This is totally going outside of our lifecycle stuff. Warning, each child in an array or iterator should have a unique key prop. So what is this telling us? This is not the same sandbox. Let me, oops. Get that, and I'll share this sandbox with you. Okay, so this is telling us that each child, obviously, we are going to be, if we see something like this, we are iterating over an array somewhere, all right? So we need to add a key to every single item on that array when we render it to the screen. So now who wants to tell me where this is happening, where this error is happening? Let's look through our call stack here and tell me where the error is happening. In Pokemon component, Pokemon component, next evolution. So we can even look through this, right? We can see, check the render method of Pokemon. Okay. It's in app, cool. It's in div, created by app. So it's telling us information here. So we got our app. We know that our app is, something's happening in here. Our div is being created by our app. In Pokemon, created by app. And then in P, created by Pokemon. So it tells us exactly where this is happening. So let's go into Pokemon, and we'll see that it is happening right here. This is the only paragraph tag we're using on the entire thing, right? And it's happening in here. So we can read our call stack here and find out exactly where this error is happening. Now, is this an error that's going to break our app? No, React is really cool about some errors, okay? This is one of them. This one, using class instead of class name, is one of them. But React will be like, hey, just so you know you're doing this wrong, we're not going to like mess with it. We'll still render it. It's not going to be like right, but we're going to give you a warning and tell you how to fix it. So this is a good way to start reading your errors. And if you don't know, React also is really good about this. If you want to know more about, like, you're like, what is a key prop? Why do I care about that? It'll give you a URL and you can go read about keeps and keep. It's pretty awesome stuff React does for us. So enjoy the errors you get from React, because when you get into Node, they're just like error, and it'll tell you where, but it's very difficult and confusing. So pretty cool way to start it. So let's come in here, and what should we do with this? So we have a map. We're mapping over this next evolution. We're giving it a paragraph tag. What should we give this paragraph tag as a key? So we're going to say key. And we can look into our data, and we know that each of these Pokemon have a unique ID, right? If they don't have a unique ID, you could use the index from the array, although that's really not great to do. So yeah, we could just say we're mapping over this Pokemon, and we can just say Pokemon.id. Wait, that's not going to work either, because they're going to have multiple. So we're just going to we'll do something like this. Let's go index. And then I want to do a key, so we're going to go something like this. Let's go our Pokemon.id, and then we'll go index. So this is going to create a unique key for us. Oh, no, yeah. This will create a unique key for us, because it's going to use the ID, and then it's going to use the index from that. So now it will be able to, that's a unique key for all of them. Okay. You could have just used index. What happens if you just use index on here? Anyone? I'm going to open this up a little bit more so we have a little bit better view. What would happen if we just use index? So a couple of things. We're probably going to get an error again, because we're going to have multiple paragraph tags on the page with the same exact key, because this is only the index from that next evolution array. So if Bulbasaur has an Ivysaur is the next evolution, it has an index of 0. Ivysaur has the next evolution with an index of 0 as well. So we're going to get this multiple key error. So by combining the ID and the index, what would happen if I only use the ID? We would get another error, because these two would have the same key, right? Because Bulbasaur's ID. So I'm just combining those and getting a unique key from it. Hopefully a unique key. So that clears up our error there. That's kind of an odd one too, because normally you can just get an ID from something, and it'll be good. But we want to make sure that we have unique keys for each. And we couldn't do, you could do something like the parent's name plus the name of the next evolution. That would work. This is first gen. Where were you at on Tuesday, Jason? So we could do combined stuff like that. You just got to make sure that it's unique. Cool. That wasn't part of the lesson. I just wanted to go over that because we got a good old-fashioned error off of that. So, all right. So let's come into here, and we're going to see what type of component is app here. I didn't mean to call you out, Jason, but we did talk about the original 151 because I was schooled on it on Tuesday. So yeah, app is a class component. Why would we use a class component? From the time we are to yesterday, why would we use a class component? to manage state, right? We want to hold state for this component. Okay, so now we have a second reason to use a class component. And what would that be? Methods, yes. Render, mount, all correct, but more specifically, life cycle methods, okay? So that we know that every single component has a life cycle, all right? It has a birth, life, and death to it, all right? This component is not rendered to the screen when I refresh this page. We can see that the only thing that's rendered to the screen when I refresh this page is a div, okay? React grabs that div and it adds stuff to it. So when we refresh the page, the only thing on here is this div. All right? App comes in, or index will, and render the app to the root element, to that div. All right, so that is the point in which this component is born, right? The point at which its life starts. And what is the very first lifecycle method that is triggered when the component is created, when it is born? It is constructor, 100%, right? How do we create an instance of a class? We have to run the constructor. So that's not even it's not even a React thing. That's a JavaScript thing, right? We have to run that constructor first in order to get anything. So let's come in here and we're just going to console log in the constructor. All right, we'll come through here and we're going to see in the constructor, okay, first things first, before even our props. And let's get rid of that render, that component. Get rid of that. Okay. So we're going to come in here and we're going to see in the constructor. All right, so we have created our we've created the instance of this class now. All right, it's floating out there in space. It's like saying, you know, new app equals new app, right? And you're like, cool, well, I've built this thing, but I've not done anything with it yet. It's alive, but it's like, you know, in utero right now. It's not quite born yet. It's not quite on the screen yet. Which is the next step that we take, and which is the next component life cycle? The next step in the life cycle. So state is part of the constructor, right? We build the state in the constructor. Set state is actually plays a huge role in the life cycle, but it's not a life cycle method per se. So the next life cycle method, I see a lot of you have put it down as render. Okay, so we've built our component, and then what we're going to do is render our component. And so what is render actually doing? Does anyone know what render is actually doing? Almost. So render is taking this JSX or ES5 React JavaScript, whichever we choose to use. It's creating a component now out of it that has a bunch of stuff going on with it. Remember when we created our own components on with the DOM, okay? And then it's going to create this component. So it's essentially going to say document dot, right, create element, and create all these components. And then what it's going to do is it's going to send that to the virtual DOM. So render isn't actually updating the virtual DOM, React is, okay? The underlying React library. That's why we have to import React, even if we're not using, oh, we are using it here. We can do this. I want to make this clear. Even if we're not using it anywhere in our file, if we don't have React up there, it won't do it because React is actually working in here, right? So React creates the component with the constructor, and then it calls render, and render returns this HTML, JSX to us, and then React is going to update the virtual DOM. Okay, so we are super used to this. We've written constructor and render many, many times, right? Let's see, I got some questions. Basically, it writes a whole bunch of nodes manually, and then React manages their state on the DOM via virtual DOM collection. Correct, Jason. Yep, that's exactly right. And I've actually kind of gone through and written the very, very, very basics of React, and I'll share that with you at the end of class today. So you can see that it's not this magical thing. I didn't write the virtual DOM. That's difficult. But I wrote all of this component stuff. It's pretty straightforward stuff, what it does. All right. So render gets called next. So we're going to say constructor, then render. And so now our component is on the screen, right? It's part of the DOM, what gets called when our component gets added to the DOM. And it actually doesn't get added to the DOM, it gets added to the virtual DOM eventually to get added to the DOM. But when it's added to the virtual DOM, we're going to call it something. I have one answer on the screen right now. No wrong answers right now. I have a component did mount, state, component did mount, component did mount. Get derived state from props. Okay. Magic. Oh yeah, it's all magic. We just know it as magic now, right? None of this is magic. Any of this happen if you don't export? No, this only happens when we're actually mounting this. Kind of gave it away a little bit. So to be fair, get derived state from props does get called. I want to say to get derived state from props gets called before render, but we're not going into that. And in fact, that was kind of a stopgap between an older lifecycle method and what we have now. The newest thing is hooks. So we're not really going to focus on get derived state from props because it's kind of difficult, and doesn't really have a whole lot of use for us. So what component will mount is actually deprecated. So that's the deprecated lifecycle method. So we don't use component will mount anymore. But for the sake of our class, what gets called next is component did mount. Okay, and so just like render. We know now that render is a lifecycle method. It is a required lifecycle method, and it's the only lifecycle method that is required. But it's a lifecycle method, okay? And just like we write render, we're going to write component did mount. Can I call this anything I want? Can I say Dan's component did mount? Got it, a bunch of no's. I can call it that if I want to, but it's never going to get fired unless I call it personally. React, just like render, is looking for these specific methods that you have added to your component, okay? So it's looking for a specific method. And so when it finds those methods, it's going to call them in order. It's going to say constructor, render, component did mount. All right. So let's come into render and we'll say console log and render. All right. So we can see the order. We got our constructor. We got render going on. Coming in here, the component did mount. So React is looking for a specific method called component did mount. All right. And if it's there, it's going to call it. If it's not, it's going to try to call it, and it's going to say like, oh, it's not there, so I'm not worried about it. Whereas render, it's going to try to call it, and if it's not there, it's going to break because you have to render something, right? So we're going to say console log in component did mount. And there we go. We have our basic birth of a component here, okay? So we have our constructor, which gets called first. We have our render, which is called second, and we have our component did mount, which gets called third. Anyone can think of a reason I would want to wait until my component was already built, rendered, and mounted to the DOM for me to do something. API, async, AJAX, waiting for state, waiting for data, submitting a form, user input. It really comes down to, we don't want to block our component from being rendered to the screen, okay? We want to make sure that something is rendered on the screen while we maybe go off and get something from an API call, right? That may take some time. We don't know how long it's going to take. It could be instant. It could take a minute, right? And we don't want our, what would you do if you went to a website, you know, you typed in whatever, twitter.com, and you just saw a gray screen sitting there, and you saw a little spinning wheel in the upper hand. You're like, okay, well, it's obviously loading, but there's nothing on the screen. I would just peace out, right? I'm like, I'm not going to sit here for a minute, right? And a minute doesn't seem long, but it seems like it is an eternity when you're waiting for a website to load. Okay, like yesterday with Facebook and Instagram. Exactly. You're like, oh, something's happening, right? Oh, no, nothing's happening. Okay, like stand-up forms. Yes, like Airtable. Right? And so it's really bad user experience to get to wait until all of your data is loaded in order to display something. So when we do component did mount, what we want to do is we want to display something to the screen, okay? And then what we want to do is we want to wait, and we can even, it could be a loading icon on the screen. If you went to a page and it loaded a couple of things and there was a little loading icon where you knew some other stuff was going to be, you would wait a little bit longer. You'd still get mad eventually, right, if it took forever to load, but you would wait a little bit longer. They say it's about 15 seconds is the breaking point. 15 seconds seems like a long time to me. If your page isn't loaded in 15 seconds, like 90% of your users leave. Okay, and it's 15 seconds, right? And if you are building a website that's trying to communicate with a server halfway across the world, then your time could very well be 15 to 20 seconds before you get that data back. And if your user is sitting there, then they're out, all right? You've lost a customer, you've lost a user, etc. Yeah, 2 seconds. Depends on what kind of internet you have. If you've got some like sweet fiber optic stuff, then you might be in the 2 second boat. But yeah, so it's just user experience. So what if we, and I'm going to make sure, see if this is part of what my notes were going to be about tonight anyways. So what we're going to do is this. I'm going to mimic a server call, okay? So how about if I go like this, and I'm going to say Pokemon data is empty, right? We still get in the constructor, in render, in CD. I'm going to H1. I'm going to say welcome to the Pokemon database. All right, so we have a welcome to the Pokemon database. Look at that. I'm going to try to think of a good way of loading this for you. I want to mimic a time, so I'm going to use set timeout. So we have welcome to Pokemon database loaded, and we're going to do a little ternary here, and we're going to say Pokemon dot length greater than 0. There's a shorter way of doing this, of course, but fine for right now. So if I say, if the length is greater than 0, let's show that Pokemon page. Otherwise, let's put another, let's do an H2, and we'll just call this our loading page. All right, so you're like, okay, cool. Something's happening. Where's, oh yeah. Yep. List.state. Should let you guys figure it out. But, so now look, okay. Say if we had put that render inside of our constructor, it would still be sitting there waiting to load. All right. Instead, we now have a welcome to the Pokemon database, so we know that our page is actually loading up, that our server's not completely broken, and it gives us a little loading. Right, this is going to be a cool animation because cool animations buy you a couple more seconds. If you ever look at like those like really cool like rainbow spinners, you're like entranced by that. There's a reason that those things exist. It's because you're going to stare at that and wonder like, oh, how does that work? For a few seconds longer than if you just had a static loading, right? So it's all for a reason, right? It's all UX. And so you're going to have a cool rainbow spinner here that really entrances your user while your app goes and gets some data. So inside of here, let's go and let's do a set timeout. What is set timeout? Who can tell me what set timeout is? Before I do that. Epic spinners, yeah. So where does set timeout come from? Okay, set timeout is a function that creates a timer based on milliseconds, wait for a bit and then do something, grace period before something runs, callback. This comes from JavaScript, right? So this is part of JavaScript. So essentially you can write window.setTimeout, and it's the same thing, all right? But we're giving it as a global, all right? So set timeout takes 2 arguments. I don't really want to go into this super deep right now, but it takes a callback, and it takes a number to wait in milliseconds. So this is going to wait for this many milliseconds and then call this callback. Pretty simple stuff, although it's not as simple when you're trying to use it. Okay, so now say this is our API call, which we're actually going to write a real API call later on. And we get some data back. And now we want to put this data on our Pokemon here. What do we need to do in order to put that data on our Pokemon, on our state? We go this dot set state, okay? And inside of here, I'm going to say Pokemon data. Let's watch. 2 seconds. Boom, there we go. So let's also look at this unique thing that's happening, okay? I'm going to do this. I'm going to clear. I don't know how to clear this. Never lets me clear it. There we go. Oh, that was easy. Okay. So let's look at our life cycle. We're getting into the life part of our life cycle now. We have our constructor. How many times in the life of our component will constructor be called? It will only ever be called one time. Only ever one time, okay? This is when our component is conceived right here, okay? It is called one time and one time only. How many times will render be called in the life cycle of our component? Maybe once, maybe a million. We don't know. It could be called a lot of times, right? So our constructor is called, our render is called, then our component did mount is called. All right. Every subsequent update. Oh, okay. I'll say this. How many times will component did mount be called? One time as well. All right. So the only method that is being called multiple times, and there are others, but for the sake of our class today, the only method that's being called multiple times is render. And when is render called? When the state changes, correct? There are other times as well. When the component mounts, yep, the original time. Okay, so the original mounting. Then when state changes, when else does it call? There's at least one more that's important. You may have not been thinking about because you haven't been using them in a couple days. Not when component unmount. Nope. Render's not called a component unmount. When props change. Boom! Will got it. All right, so we have, oh, and Luis got it as well. I don't think anyone else got it before then. But we have at least 3 times that render is called. Okay, when our component is originally mounted, when either our state has changed, so if our state gets updated, then render will be called, or our props get changed. How does React know that your state is updated? Set state. That's the only way it knows, right? So set state actually changes your state, and then it triggers a render. Okay, it's like, oh, the state has changed. Let's go trigger a re-render, build this component out again, and then we'll add it to the virtual DOM. All right, that's it. So that's why we can't just say this.state.pokemon equals data. Right, we have to use this set state method because this is telling React, hey, it's updating, so go and call render again. When our props get changed, React instantly knows about that because, well, number one in components, because we use this dot props, and because it has its own internal system to understand when props are changed. It reacts to each change in state. I think I've already made that joke, but I don't think it's a joke either. That's why we call it, that's why it was named React, okay? Because it does react. It has the UI that reacts to change in state. All right, so, 1 second. All right, cool. This is, I'm not gonna touch that, Jason, but there is some roots in that for sure. Okay, so what we're doing is we're gonna render our component to the screen. We'll get a little loading spinner going. Wish this was a spinner, but it's not. And then we'll wait for our data to come back. So we're gonna say that and 2 seconds is quite enough time for us. So let's go 3. So we'll see here that, let's clear this, and we'll do this. So first things first, our constructor is called, our render is called, NCDM is called. Then, once our state is updated, render is called again, okay? Look at that. So we got render being called 2 times on our state here. So we have almost a full life cycle. What is the one, oh yeah, we could do that one as well. I'm just looking at my notes real quick. What are a couple? There's a couple of different lifecycle methods that we haven't touched yet. What's the main one that we haven't touched? We've lived a life. Component did update, right? So component did update will be called on it as well. Component did mount, we've already called it, right? We have component will unmount as well. So let's say that, man, I don't have it on the Pokemon. I wish I had a way of doing it on app here. But let's say that there was a time when we, clicked on one of these and it went to a different page. Well, then everything on this page would unmount, okay, and it would go into the ether, right? And at that point, we would have a componented unmount. So what's a useful reason? Does anyone know of a reason that we should ever call componented unmount or will unmount? It's not did, because you don't have a component if it did. Yeah, cool. Closed sockets. Those that know what sockets are, connection data, essentially the same thing. Cleanup tasks. It's a cleanup time. It's like, okay, I did a bunch of stuff on the browser in your page. Event listeners are the biggest one. If you have any refs or event listeners on your refs, those are the biggest ones to stop them. If you were using something like set interval instead of set timeout, you're going to have something that repeats over and over and over again. Then you could stop the set interval, right? It's a cleanup period. So you're like, oh, okay, our component is very nearing the end of its life. We need to come in here and clean everything up and get it ready to unmount it. Okay. So there are a couple others. We'll go over those after the break. But for now, let's take a 5, and we'll see you in 5 minutes. If you have any questions, please post them in Slack, and I'll get to them when we get back. I don't have my music set up on to display what on my computer is going. So for now, we're going to go regular timer. All right, come on back. We'll continue going on, and we'll build out a couple other apps as well. So I'm going to answer Jason's question on here. This is kind of two questions. So we have, if we pass state as a prop, right? So we are passing state as a prop right here. If we change the state, which we are, right? We're changing the state from empty to we've got some data now. The prop has already been passed, so the state cannot change re-render the DOM. So there's kind of a tricky question. The prop will, so think about this. When the state is changed, what happens? And this is an actual question for you. When the state is changed and React knows about it, what happens? It calls render, right? And what does render do? It builds our component, right? So it creates this, again, from scratch, all right? It creates it from scratch, and it loads it onto the virtual DOM. So when state changes, it absolutely is passing the new state down as a prop because it's creating a brand new component. And so why React is so powerful is because it does this behind the scenes and doesn't then add all of this to the DOM. It only adds the pieces that have changed. Okay, so yes, it does pass state. When state changes, it re-renders and it passes that new state as a prop down to the component. And it continues that way. If our props change, so if we had props that changed, and if we were using those props in our component, then it would create a re-render, or it would trigger a re-render as well, and do the same thing. So render, it's so funny to, like, you got to really think about React isn't this like super fluid, always on, like data is like totally passing through it and like this like sinuous, pipeline. It's actually rebuilding the entire app or the entire component if some little thing changes. Okay, it's rebuilding the entire thing from scratch, and then it's checking to see if anything has changed on the actual DOM, and that's what makes it so fast. So it really is a hard thing to like a thing to step away from, that it's not this always on thing. Okay, it's rebuilding every single time. Wouldn't it be a con? It is a con, right? It's a con when you do that to the DOM. If you were building an actual application with vanilla JavaScript or with Angular 1 or a lot of it will rebuild that entire thing, and then it will put the entire thing, it will change the entire DOM every time. Okay, React actually does it to where it rebuilds it, and then it only changes the pieces that need to be repainted. All right, so that's why React is so cool, because everything else would just say like, here's our new page, throw it on the DOM. Here's our new page, throw it on the DOM. Okay, React says, here's our new page, which pieces do we need to change about it? So that's why it is the way it is. So yes, the new state is being passed as a prop, and it is triggering a re-render on the Pokemon component. And the Pokemon component has props coming to it, and it's re-rendering because those props have changed, and state has re-rendered Pokemon, right? Yes, it is exactly the way Git works. And in fact, they call it a diff, just like Git does. So they do a diffing algorithm between the DOM and the virtual DOM. Yep. Okay, that was a little aside, but I think it hopefully cleared some things up in your brains about what React does. Your second part of the question was about hooks. We're not getting into hooks. I will talk about hooks for 1 second. Hooks are brand new. Hooks essentially are changing the entire way we do React and we use React. We no longer have state. We no longer have class components. We will no longer have lifecycle components or methods. Hooks is brand new as of like 2 weeks ago. We are still teaching this because this is 99.99999% of all React apps out there right now, and will continue to be for a long time. Okay. So we want you to be prepared to jump into something and build an actual application when you become a professional. And you're going to see this pattern years down the road. All right. Also, this helps us understand exactly how React is working. Hooks kind of take away a lot of the how and just say it's magic. Okay. And really the whole magic thing, I personally like to know how and why things work. Yeah, I heard hooks are out. Totally. But so I will promise you this. I will give an after hours brown bag on hooks so you can see what it's all about. Once you have this down, hooks are really easy. Okay. So just know that they're really simple once you have all of this down, but you really need to have this down in order to really understand it. But I promise you I'll give an after hours brown bag in the coming weeks on hooks. Cool. So that's our last talk about hooks until that. let's focus on what we've got going on. Okay. Where was I? Yeah, we're going to talk about one other lifecycle method that I didn't talk about. Boom, there you go. So what's one lifecycle method I didn't talk about yet? And it is part of our life. And a couple of you mentioned it already. Anyone? Got any others? There's should component update, sure. There's get initial props, we get initial state from props. Yep. We did talk about the def, so we did talk about component will unmount. So I can put a component will unmount in here. It's not going to really do anything for us because we don't have any time that our component's going to unmount in this point. Component did update. Yes. So CDU, component did update. So what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to do some stuff. Let me ask you this question. When should I use set state inside of the render method? At what point should I do that? Anyone got anything? Nothing? You can't think of a single time I should use set state in the render method? Yeah, you're right. You're all right. Never, ever, 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 ever use set state in the render method. Because what does set state do? It calls render, and you get into this infinite loop. But what if when our component, when our state or our props were updated, we wanted to act on that somehow? We can't do that in render, right? We just can't do it. And so we need another life cycle in order to check to see if the state has been updated or the props have been updated to a certain thing that we want, right? And so we can use component did update, right? So component did update takes two arguments. I always forget which order they're in. This is the time I always look up our docs. Who's got the arguments that they take in what order? Yeah, we can just console log them if we want. Do it, just see what happens. Okay. No, I'm not going to do it. I don't know how Code Sandbox works. If it'll freeze up my browser and then we'll be stuck for a minute. I'll do it right before our next break. It just goes into an infinite loop and it'll error out and it'll be like, boop, nope, infinite loop. Does anyone know which? All right, I'll find out. All right, so thank you, Rain. Our component did update takes two arguments, the previous props and the previous state. Why do we care about previous props and previous state? And where is our current props and our current state at? Yeah, so our current props is dot props, right? Right in here. Totally fine. Our current state is this dot state. So now we can use our previous props and our previous state in order to say, like, if this dot props doesn't equal this dot props dot, user ID. So if I wanted to make sure that I only was doing something when the user ID was updated. Okay, I was like, oh, when the user ID is updated, I want to send another API call to get that user instead. All right. And so I can continue keeping this component mounted and just go get a new user. All right. And so, sorry. So we can use those previous to check it against what our current updated props are and what our previous state is compared to what our current updated state is. Okay, so that's fine and dandy. But let's just do something very simple right now with component did update. So let's go, and that wasn't this dot previous props. Sorry, I said that. It's just previous props. So what if I said I'm going to add a new, I'll say name. I always go with name because it's super easy. Okay, so we have a name on there, and I'm going to go name dot length, or name. I'll just do name does not equal empty string. State dot name. Let's go. Otherwise, oh yeah. Oh, that's where I went wrong. Okay, we're already in JavaScript. Cool. So no name on here, right? Because their name's an empty string. So this is a ternary operator once again. And I'm just looking to see if there's a name on here. And if there is, I'm going to render it to the screen. If there's not, I'm just going to say welcome. So let's say that once our component did update, so we'll say this dot state length is greater than previous state dot Pokemon dot length. All right, so we're going to do an if here. And I say, if this has happened, let's do something else. Okay. I'm trying to get like the joke of Arnold's welcome. I hope I didn't say anything offensive out loud. So what we're doing now is let's just console log in. Let's check it out. Our constructor, our render, our CDM gets called, and then our render gets called again. All right, next. And then when our render gets called, our component did update gets called because it did update. Not will, it did update. So if you're ever using component will update, that's a deprecated lifecycle method now. So component did update. Then we're going to check to see if the current state of the Pokemon, if the length of that array is greater than the previous length. What was the previous length of that array? 0. The previous state, let's look at our previous state, Pokemon, before component did mount was called, was 0, right? There's nothing in there. So our constructor gets called, there's nothing in there. Render gets called, there's nothing in there. Loading, loading, right? Our component did mount gets called, still nothing in there, okay? Still nothing in there for 3 seconds. All of a sudden, set state is called, and now there is something in there. So what happens? Set state calls render. Component did update because the component was updated, gets called after render. So now our previous state is 0, our current state is 151. And so now this is going to be true, and we're going to console log Pokemon state change, component will update. Okay? Does that make sense to you all? This life cycle. It's a life cycle. All right? It starts and it ends, but in the middle it's a cycle and it keeps running. And we can look for specific things. So if I say this.state.pokemon.length is greater than previous state.pokemon.length, let's do something else. So now I will remember I said we can't run set state in render. Justin, you're the first one on there. But we can run set state in component did update. All right, so now let's look at what exactly is happening here. The whole life cycle so far. Our component is constructed. Boom. That's our first step. Step 2, render is called. At this state, the current state of this application, name is an empty string and Pokemon is an empty array. All right. So we're going to get that loading screen and we're not going to get any name on the screen. After that, after this has been rendered, yes, sorry, I haven't been updating this. Component did mount. Right? So component did mount gets called next. So let's go up to our component did mount. And now our page is on the screen, but we're going to go send an API call to set to get some data. Set state is called inside of there, and set state automatically calls render again. Right? So we can then say component did mount, and then we can say render. And I'm going to say slash component did update. All right, and then this goes on until component mount. All right, so component did mount gets called. The component is updated, so render gets called. And component did update gets called after render. All right. In here, we can check to see if a specific thing we wanted is changed. All right. So if I say set state and I change the name of Justin, once again, next step, I'll copy that. Save that again for you all. Render component did update gets called. Render component did update gets called. But let's check this out. Let's look at our consoles here. Check it out. In the constructor, in render, in component did mount. That's all pretty straightforward. In render, yeah, component did update is called. Our Pokemon state has changed. Component will update. So our render is called again. And now we get a component did update call, but we don't get that Pokemon state changed. And why is that? Because it didn't change, right? We're looking for something very specific to change on here. Our state could be 35 items long, and we could have 35 different if statements. If something changes here, I want you to also change that. If something changes here, I want you also to change that. In this case, we're looking for one very specific change. We're not looking for a change on name. We're looking for a change on Pokemon, period. All right? And we're looking for a very specific change. So what if I went and got more data, and it cut our Pokemon in half. So then we only have 76 Pokemon in here, which is not exactly half, I understand. What would this get triggered? If our new state only had 76 Pokemon in it? No, because our old had 151. So it wouldn't even get triggered. It only gets triggered when that increases. Okay. So does this make sense? Are we starting to get the life cycle now? Understand the cycle of life for our components? And unfortunately, I don't have a good example for component did unmount. So I think that this image does a great job. So we have our render phase. I don't like the get snapshot before update and get derived state from props, all this stuff. But we have mounting, updating, and unmounting, right? So mounting, constructor, don't worry about that. Render, React updates the DOM and refs, component did mount. Now we're in this, right? So we're updating, render, component did update. Okay, we can talk about should component update. That's just a true or false, a Boolean statement that it returns. And then unmounting, component will unmount. These, that one, and these three are the ones we really care about for this right now. All right. I'm going to save that. That's open to you. And we are going to go and look at, where's my notes? Okay. We're going to go look at another application. Let me give you that. All right. So in this application, we're going to look at a couple of things. We see that we have an app. So one quick thing to notice is that we don't have a constructor on our component now, right? This is a class component. We don't have a constructor. Is a constructor required now? And this is kind of a new thing too. So if we're not, and even we'll show you something else, constructors are not really required anymore. Babel has done a great job at understanding classes, and there's really no need anymore for constructors. They're still getting called. It's behind the scenes. It's magic, but now in 2019, it's not necessary. Okay, and I'll show you even how you create state without it, because we have something that's called class properties. So we can create a class property instead of using it in the constructor. We don't have any state on this. We're rendering. Nothing's changing, right? We're not doing any kind of changes on this. I don't know why the service worker is registered. Let's go look at our earthquake container. And then we're just looking at this now. We're not going to actually do anything with this yet. Not tonight. Okay, so before your minds explode, we can create state like this. This is essentially saying this dot state equals, etc. Right? If you feel comfortable doing this, feel free. If you still feel comfortable writing a constructor, which I do most of the time, then write the constructor. But this is totally valid now for creating state. I know, crazy. There's even like a mind blow thing in my notes. So you can create state like that. I want to point that out because this is something that you're going to start seeing when you start looking up problems to answers or answers to problems in your code and you're reading blogs. You're going to see this a lot. So we don't want you to be blindsided by this syntax. And I'll find that there's a good blog post about it. This is very new. Yes, Wilfred. There's a good blog post about it, and I'll share it with you. I'll find it tonight and share it with you. Nope, it's all done automatically for us now, Ronnie. This is what I'm saying. Like, you got to learn the right way first before you learn the magic way. Because if you learned it this way, you'd have no idea that this was actually calling a constructor, that was actually calling super, that was actually creating the state from our parent component, etc. Right? Okay, so what we're going to come down here, and we're going to see an actual API call happen. This isn't an actual API call. Fetch Quakes. Yeah, it is. Okay. It's actually coming from our services. This is an actual API call happening, and we are going to see what it looks like actually in our next little thing. So our app is being created. It's a big app too. This is Dustin's. Cool. So our app is being created, and once it's created, once it's rendered to the screen, then we're going to go fetch stuff. All right. So let's console log fetched, and we'll see it takes a minute, and we're fetched. Okay. So that is created. What did I do there? All right. So once that is our set state, our render is being called once again, and these earthquakes are being mapped to the screen. So this is just kind of showing you how an actual app works with this kind of stuff. Okay. So coming back into here, we'll see that it is going to render something called earthquakes map on here. Let's go take a look at earthquakes map, if I can find it. And in earthquakes map, we have a class. We don't have a constructor because we don't need one, right? We don't even have state on this one. We have a component did update. But first things first, we're going to come down and see our render is going to render something that says loading map. So I'm going to do this. Where's our CDM? We have a load map. Where is load map being called? Hold on a second. Oh, there we go. Okay, right in here in component did update. So what this is doing is this is passing new data down, our quakes, our Google, and some props. It's passing new data down to this map. And when those props, see, look at this, if previous props.google doesn't equal the current props.google, or if the quakes have changed, then load the map. Otherwise, don't load the map. Okay, so let's go and let's just comment this out. See what we got. So now, before our map is ever loaded, we have loading map, right? When our props change, we are now calling load map with those new points on there, all right? So this is, I've shared this with you. You can go look at it. I wouldn't even call this a production app, but this is getting up to the level of production quality. So you can actually look at something that's using this stuff, right? There's a lot of stuff in here. You're going to be like, what does even this mean? So don't pay too much attention to all of the details in this, but you can take a look through it, all right? And let's see, I did not miss anything on that one. Yeah. So yeah, so we can see if we go click on an 8, submit, it's going to load a new map for us, right? Because things have changed. We're changing things on here, all right? Okay, that was just a little example I wanted to show you regarding, let's go into here, leave. Create a sandbox. We're going to create a new app pretty quick. All right. I'm glad you're glad you saw it. It's very confusing. Like, it took me a minute to walk through that app, but I wanted you to see what actual production quality code looks like too. So let's build a quick app that's going to render a bunch of images of dogs to a screen. All right. I'm going to change this from a function to a class. Why would I change this from a function to a class? I only got the dogs API. If you find me a cats API, I'll make one of those too. Yeah, in our case, we are going to manage state, and we want our lifecycle methods, okay? So function to a class, and if you're using hooks, you don't need to anymore. But for now, we're going to say class, and we're going to say app, and we're going to say extends, and I'll say react.component. We need to do a couple things. What do we need to add for sure? This only needs one thing in order to render the screen right now. I totally gave it away too. Yeah, you're right. Render, right? I need a render method. Otherwise, it's not going to do anything. Save that. I will share this with you as well. Okay, I lied. I said give me a cats API, but I already have the dogs API, the whole address pulled up, and I don't really want to go dig through that cat, but I will create one for you. Okay, so let's see. Class app extends React component. Why is that? Thank you. There we go. All right, see, even then you've written 100,000 React components, you still screw up. I love that the sandbox previews and the error screen. That's so great. Okay, so we now have a component on here. So I'm going to create a very simple dogs app. So I'm going to use, let's go through this. I can actually close that out because I'm not doing anything with it. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to need some state. How do I create that state? We just learned that there's a couple of different ways we can do it. I'm going to use the constructor still. I'm going to say this.state. I'm going to create an item on state. What would that item be called? Dat. What will that item be called? What will that? Oh, data. Okay. They were making fun of me. I'm going to call it doggos because we're calling it doggos here. We can call it data if we want, but doggos is way more fun. The doggos, and what value does doggos need to be? It needs to be something. Right? It needs to be an array. Wait, what? Oh, yeah. Huh? So I'm missing something from my constructor, and there we go. All right. So you notice it was like, I don't know what state is. I don't know how to access that because I didn't have super, and super is calling the React component parent. All right. So now my list of doggos is loading up. All right. And I can do something even better, like I'm going to say hello code sandbox. I'm going to say hello doggos. All right. And so we have something loaded up now, right? Cool. Like, it's loaded. We're ready to go. You came to my dog image website, and it loaded up, and it says, hello, doggos. We need a loading, so we can come in here and do this. we'll say this state doggos length 0. Oop, there we go. And then we'll go or Prettier is going to format all this for me beautifully. We're going to H2 and we're going to do loading again. I'll save that. And then Prettier formats it all for me. That's the beauty of Prettier. Okay. So we don't have any dogs in our doggos. Thank you. All right. So we're going to load the loading screen. This will be loaded. This will happen when we have dogs in our array, right? All right, so our constructor is being called. Our render is being called, okay? And that's it. Now we have something on the screen. Now, what I want to do is I want to make an actual API call to get a bunch of images of dogs, all right? Where do I need to put this API call initially? DCM? I know that's a typo, but yes, component did mount, right? I knew all of you were correct. I even knew your typo was correct, right? We all make typos. I make hundreds of them a night. So component did mount. Where we're going to make our initial API call. How many times does component did mount get called in the life cycle? Once and only once. It's during our setup time, right? So if we look at our life cycle, it's our mounting, our setup time, our birth of our component here. Birth, life, death, right? This is our setup time. So it's getting called. So we can now come in here. Oop, not that one, not that one, that one. Did I share this with you yet? I'll share it again, just for the heck of it. I did, because I said, oh yeah, there we go. Okay, so in component did mount, we want to actually get some data. I am going to copy paste some data into here. Do not worry about what this all means. All right, you are going to be learning about this in 2 weeks. Okay, you'll learn to write your own fetches and Axios calls. It's promises, yes. Oh man, I wanted to not do this though. Then return. Okay. So what this is going to do, and I'll just run through it real quick, it's going to go get whatever we're getting at this address, okay? If you want to look and see what it is, we can go look and see what it is. It's going to be data. It's a lot of data. And what this is an array of URLs for dogs. Okay, just images of dogs. Click on it. It's an image of a dog. What is that? It's a husky, but oh, look at those puppies. It's all husky images, right? Because we're asking for huskies. We're going to go over this stuff on our own, just so you know this is what's happening. We're getting this from a server. How long is it going to take us to get this data from the server? Hopefully less than 15 seconds. Yeah, hopefully. Right? We don't know. Right? We have no idea how long it's going to take us from the server. That's why we have that loading. We don't want to rely on this being fast in order to load our page up. Okay, we want to wait until our page is loaded and then component did mount this. Okay, so what's happening here is our component is already mounted, right? It did mount, it already mounted, And now we're going to go and get some data. Inside of here, I am going to get this data back, and I'm going to do something. I'm going to this.set state on our new data, and I'm going to say doggos is dogs.message. Okay, so also don't worry about this. Any of this stuff, we're going to go over this once again. All right. So what this did was it loaded our app up, and then it went and fetched some new data. Okay, and didn't take very long. Right. If I hit that, if I'll refresh this, and we'll see how long it takes. But by the time from when we see hello doggos to when we see the state, right, it took less than a second for us to load that data. But we cannot guarantee that, so that's why we put it in component did mount. It's really cool stuff. We're gonna be using Dogs API quite a bit, and I'll make sure that I put Cats API in there as well. All right. Any questions on this right now? What I just did here, besides the fetch stuff? I mean, this is all, once again, we're just going through this again and again. We're going through the whole cycle, right? Okay. Think on it. We're going to take another 5. We're going to come back. We're going to write, and we're going to be able to actually go fetch dogs from this now instead of just huskies. And then we'll do a little component update. So we'll see you back in 5, and we'll finish up tonight. I really like that joke, Jason. Bravo. Okay. All right. Come on back, everyone. Oh man, we're talking APIs now. Those of you, if trust me, we're going to get into using plenty API stuff. So don't worry and focus on that stuff now. If you're like, I don't even know what this is talking about, what's an API, etc. We're going to get into that. Trust me, you're going to use it plenty. But for now, we are going to talk about life cycles. And the reason we're talking about APIs right now is that because they go really well with life cycles. All right. That's the only reason. I could do set timeout all day long and you would get the point. But using an actual API and showing you some actual code, like kind of, I think, drills it in a little bit better as well. All right. So now what we're going to do, first of all, do we have any other questions? I saw a lot of API talk, but I didn't really see any questions in there. I saw some Chihuahuas and some Shiba Inus. So this dogs API, I gotta warn you, is really finicky. So I've done entire classes where we try to find dogs, and it's like Chihuahua, and like, how do you spell Chihuahua? Okay, we spelled it right, but oh, they want a capital C. It's weird. So we might not get all the dogs we want on here. Yes, you cannot find dog pics anywhere other than the dogs API. Right. Okay, so we're going to come in here and we're going to create a real-ish app. Right. So we have this, it loads up Huskies, it's cool, it works, right? But what if we want to make it so that users can load up whatever kind of dog they want? Where should we start? Where should we start that? If you're a user, you come to the Hello Doggos site. It loads up some Huskies by default eventually, and now you want to do it. Form, search bar, right? Yeah, I'd say those are the correct. That's where I would start. I would make an input field. I would make a form. I would make a search bar, and something to that was able to actually search for the dog. So let's come in here. And we are going to, instead of doing a complete form, I'll show you another way of doing it. We're going to go input. Actually, let me see if this will autofill for me. And we're going to make a search bar. I'm going to say type of text. Is this necessary? Is 100% necessary? No, it's not. Not in modern time, but it might be necessary if you have a bunch of inputs on here just to know. It defaults to text, though. I always put it just because that's what I do. Okay, so what do we know about inputs? What should our value be? We've talked about inputs before. We know that we want this to be a controlled input, right? We want to do this the React way. So what should I do next? We have an on string. We have empty string that's somewhere in state. This set state.text. Value should be empty. It should. Placeholder should be there. And we need a change handler. Yep. Yeah, so I think the general consensus is we need something on our state, right? And so we should say this is like Doggos text. And we'll just make that an empty string. And we will initialize our input with the value of that. Okay, so now we are controlling our input. All right, so now when I come in here, I can type all I want and it's not changing because we're not changing the state, and the state is controlling what our value is. All right, so next thing we need to do is we need to create an on change. On change is an event, right? It's listening for any change that happens to our input. Okay, so I see that Jason already put one up there. We've gone over this so many times. We're gonna continue writing this over and over again throughout this course, but I'm gonna kind of speed through this a little bit more now. So I'm gonna say change handler is a function, takes an event, and inside of here we're going to set state. And in here, we can say event.target.name, but our input doesn't have a name, right? It doesn't have a name on it. If we only have this one input on this, do we need a name on here? No, we don't. We don't need a name on here. Okay, we could if we want. If we had multiple inputs, just like Ronnie said, um, we would want to have a name on there because then we could use one change handler. But since we're only using it for this one, we're just going to say Doggo's text on here. We're going to hard code this in. If we were to ever put more than one, I would take this out. I would put that on the as a name on this input, and I would change this. But since we're only doing one, no big deal. E.target. What are we doing for this? Value. Okay, and then we're going to put our change handler in our on change. So we're going to say this dot, right? Because this is change handler is a method on this class. Okay. All right. So we should be able to type stuff in there now. When I type stuff in there, this is updating our state. All right. So let's come in here. And now that we can type something in, so if I type in Labrador, oh, yeah, that's how you spell Labrador. I can't do anything with this, right? So what I need to do is create a button. I'll create a simple button that says fetch doggos. It's going to be an ugly, ugly, normal, standard button. That doesn't do anything for us. Why isn't this, when I click this, why isn't this refreshing the page? Does anyone know? Not collecting those stuff. Remember how normally we'll hit the button and it refreshes the page, all right? If you have this button inside of a form, it will automatically refresh the page for you. We don't need to prevent default if we're not inside of a form. Okay, so just so you know that the button will automatically trigger the forms on submit, but if it's not in a form, it's just a regular old button. All right. Little fun fact. Okay, so I'm going to create a helper called fetch dogs. Much of this is outside of the scope of this lecture, but I'm going to I'll do one thing real quick. So we're going to say fetch. I'm going to give it the address. Dog.ceo. Dog CEO. API / breed. So we're looking for a certain breed. And now we need to tell the API which breed we want to search for. How would I do that? Yep, we'll use some string templating literals on here. And we're going to say, yes, we want to search for this specific breed, and which one do we want to search for? Ooh, we don't know. We don't want to hard code that in, right? We want to say, yeah, the value of the input that we give it, right? We don't know what that is. We don't care. Target that value. So what's the target when I click this button? The button itself is the target. So we have saved the value of this input somewhere in this, right? We've saved it to our state. Okay, so our state is going to be the value that we want to search for. So we can say, and we'll go over what this fetch means, state doggo text. And I need to also give it now images. So we want to get the images of those dogs. Okay, cool. I just wanted to show you we inputted the state in here, and that's why we hold it in the value. That's why we want a controlled input. Okay, because we want to then just be able to go randomly and say, what's the current value of the state? That's what we're going to use. Could we make a drop down that is provided breed options by the API? I don't know how this API works at a very, very intricate level. Possibly. You could also possibly just, give a list of your own breeds that would search for it. You'd have to search into the documentation of the API to find out if they will supply a list of breeds. That'd be a good idea. It'd be a cool little thing to build. So I'm going to add a few lines in here. We're going to go .then. We'll say dogs. And then once we get the list of dogs back, don't worry about this yet. Okay, once we get our list of dogs back, we want to then make them override these lists of all these huskies. Okay. I bet if you go to dog.ceo, it'll tell you all about it. But we want to override this list of huskies. So now what do we need to do? We get this list of dogs images back. Don't worry about the fetch. Just know that this is an array of images. Yeah, we need to set the state, okay? And we're just going to override doggos, and we're going to go dogs message. Final thing on our button, we need an onClick. So when we click this button, it's actually going to call fetch dogs. Any questions about what's going on here so far, regardless of the fetch? Regardless of the fetch. It's the way it gives it back to us, right? So if I remember, it gave us an object, and there's a key called message, and it has an array on it. That's the only reason we're doing that. It's different for every single one. We'll talk about APIs later. Yeah, great idea. Awesome, Rain. Perfect. I did not clear our input, right? Boom. Rain, John. Okay, Ronnie, that's a great question. The onClick needs an anonymous function to not invoke immediately, right? No. What is fetch dogs? It is, if we take the name of it away, that's what it is, right? So it's not going to invoke it immediately. We're just calling fetch dogs this. If we were calling fetch dogs in here, then we would need to wrap that in an anonymous function. Okay, but we're not, so we don't. No worries. Great questions. All right, let's see if this thing works. So remember, our app is, let's refresh this. Ooh, let's save that and then refresh it. Okay. Our app loads up. We're going to get a little loading icon. Boom, we got our dogs up there now. So our constructor happened. Our initial render happened. Then our component did mount happen. So once our component was already rendered to the screen, our component did mount got rendered. Okay. And it takes a little bit, a couple of seconds. I think it was less than 1 second. Then we run a set state once we get that new data back. Right? Why don't we just do this in render? Didn't ask for breeds yet. Everyone's just going for it. Why don't we do this in render? Seems like we can just call fetch in render, right? Yeah, because we are calling set state in there. You got to make sure that you never put a set state in render. And so that's even like, unless it's right here, because we're only setting state conditionally, right? So I don't want to ever have any set state, even if it's buried deep in here in render. All right, we're going to wait till it mounts, and then we're going to call this. Once we get that new data back, that new state back, it's going to update our state, and then what happens? Once our state gets updated, what gets called? Render. Once our state is updated, render is called first, and then component did update gets called. Okay. So now we have a list of dogs here. Fetch dogs is not in a component lifecycle method. But what happens when all right, give me a dog name. First one out there. And it better be spelled correctly. Bulldog. Ooh, I don't think I've had Bulldog yet. When I hit fetch doggos, it's going to fetch, and then what's going to happen? What's going to get called after it fetches? Render, right? Then it's going to create this whole page over again. It's going to look to see what changed, and it's going to change those on the DOM. So boom. And there we go. What is that? That's absurd. I don't even have to. Is that a bulldog? This doesn't look like bulldogs to me. These are Boston Terriers. All right. Is it really a boxer? Who look like Boston Terriers to me? Anyways, besides the breeds of dogs, I can't look at that. I gotta. All right, so so we got to re-render out of it, right? Let's do this now. Now that this is working, someone give me another dog name. I'll try the Shiba Inu, but I could not get it to work before. Yeah, we got an error on that one. Sorry. I should have an error message on here, but we're not getting into that yet. We're gonna go with one letter or one word dogs. Sorry, I just saw the first one I saw. All right. So let's go do a component did update. Does it matter where I write this at? Does it matter? Does it have to be in order up here? Component mount, component did update. No, doesn't matter at all. It's just looking for something that said that. Just a note too, this casing is super important. If I said component did update with a lowercase u, this is never going to get called. All right. So casing is very important. If you're unsure of what the casing is, look it up in React. Lazy loading is something that's far down the line. So we're going to go component did update. What is our two arguments that component did update takes? What are our? I said what is. We have previous state and previous props. It's actually previous props first. It is important, the order, obviously, because React is going to pass these two things in there in that order. All right. So let's come in here to just do a quick console log component did update. All right. We got a component did update. Why did we get one already? Why did I already get a component did update? We haven't even clicked fetch dogs yet. Does anyone know why? Because render was called. Render. Yeah, with that initial fetch, right? We got to look at that component did mount, did a fetch, and then our component did update was called. Okay. So let's do this. Let's go. That's. Oh, why does it keep opening that screen for me? All right. So component did update. Let's come in here. And we're going to say if previous state dot doggos does not equal this dot state dot doggos. An array, this should work. An object, this would not work. So we'd have to look for a length or something else on here. So we're going to say now let's just look for this, right? If I typed in Husky right here, is doggos have changed going to fire? We'll see. I'm unsure about comparing two arrays like that, but we'll see. It has. Ah, dang it. Let's go. I like this. We'll just do this. State dot. So this is just comparing what the first item is. So I don't want it to change on Husky. If you have two arrays, it's going to say that they're different no matter what. And now we didn't get a doggos have changed, right? But if I type in boxer, we do, right? Because they have changed. You'll also notice that component did update is updating every time I type something in here. Why is that? Why does it get called? Why does it get called every time I type something? Yeah, our state's changing, right? Our component is updating. React is re-rendering this entire thing and looking in the DOM and seeing what's changed. It might be one character on the page, but that's what's happening. So our component is updating. Previous state is happening. We don't need to check to make sure that our the inputs are different. We don't care about that. We're only looking at the dogs, right? So we can pick and choose which dogs or which pieces of state or which pieces of the props are updating and update based on that. And we can do that conditionally the entire time, okay? So that's essentially what I've got for you tonight. Let me save this. Boom, boom, boom. That's there for you. You can try to type in Shiba Inu and Great Pyrenees and Irish Wolfhound and things like that if you want. But feel free to look this over. But that's essentially what we got. We're dealing with life cycles right now, dealing with how these components actually work and how React is actually rendering these components to the screen. Would you use these React lifestyle methods specifically if you fetch data? Yes. This. I mean, I showed you the earthquake, right? That is an actual app that one of our instructors built that is using lifecycle methods to fetch data, and 100%, yes. Any other questions right now regarding lifecycle methods, React components, and how they are created and updated on the DOM? Lots of typing, so I'll give it a moment. Yeah, okay. I thought I shared it, but let me share it again with you. Totally, Joseph. All right. So this if statement logic. When our dogs are updated, let's do this. Let's clear it and let's refresh it. will we get a doggos have changed when these huskies are rendered to the screen? Will we get that? Do you think we will? Question for you all. We will. So think about it. What's our initial state? Is an empty array, right? So when our huskies are initially rendered to the screen, our component is updated. And we're looking to see if the first item in the old array is equal to the first item in the new array. And if they're not the same, then we're going to say doggos have changed. So what's the first item in the old array at this point? Oh, no worries. It's undefined, right? Our first item in our new array is going to be this image right here of this sleeping husky. So they're going to be different. So now we're going to get called. So let's see. Sorry, I got to refresh the page. That's why I keep getting. So yeah, we get that doggos have changed automatically. All right. So this is comparing the old state to the new state. And we can do the same thing with props. If we have props that we're looking for a certain prop to change, and if that prop changes, we want to do something with it, we can. Okay. And just like I said too, I can come in here and say, set the state, and then we'll get another componented update, right? But this is not triggered because the name updated, not the doggos updated, right? So we're looking for very specific things. When I type stuff in here, I don't ever see a doggos have changed, even though our state is changing. So that's what componented update. It allows us to conditionally look for specific things that are updating and do something based on that. Does that answer your question a little bit better? All right. For all of you Doge fans out there, there you go. Got it. All right. That's what I got for you tonight, everyone. Yeah, you're not dealing with the API. Oh, no. Christopher, no. It's an Akita Inu. It's not even a Shiba Inu. All right, everyone.